Good morning and welcome. So today I've been out with the dogs already. It was quite crisp, let's say, although wet as well. So we really are seeing this sort of autumn weather coming in now. But it's sunny outside at the moment. This week we're weather forecast again, of course. This week we're expecting quite a bit of rain. But I have been given several squash, like pumpkins and a couple of courgettes, which are rather weird. I'll show you those. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about squash because they are perhaps underrated. And at this time of year, we use them for Halloween and make sort of candle holders out of them. And it's all part of that season. But there's an awful lot more to pumpkins than Halloween. So I just wanted to show you what I've got here. So I'll just turn the camera around. So here we have my trug. I've put the squash in the trug. I think I need to do something more with this because they're a bit too deep. But here we've got this lovely sort of sagey green one. That's Crown Prince. And then over here is a regular pumpkin, which I received from a friend at the end of August. Two other little pumpkins. I have no idea what these are, but isn't this absolutely beautiful? And a little orange one. And then rather enormous, sorry, I'm not doing this very well, am I? Rather enormous courgettes, which may or may not be good, I don't know. Right, so let's stand back. So here we've got summer squash, which are courgettes, and winter squash. So there's a little difference between them. I'll just change this back again. So let's sit down because I was wobbling a bit with the camera. So winter squash and summer squash, there are some differences. They seem to have very similar mineral sort of and nutritional makeup. But summer squash tend to have thinner skins, they don't last as long, and they're best eaten fresh. Where the winter squash, I mean, I can't believe how beautiful that is. They've got thicker skins and they last much longer, so they can last up to 6 months, and that's probably very much dependent on the variety and the conditions in which you keep them. But I have certainly had squash for several months, and these squash, as I said, been given these, so I feel very fortunate to be given these. They're going to look nice. I need to redress this because they're a bit low, but then I will cook them. And basically, squash, I think, are fairly underrated. At this time of year, we tend to know pumpkins, we carve them, we put candles in them, we use them for Halloween, and we use them decoratively. And then I see a lot of waste. And depending on how you keep that pumpkin, once you've carved it, you can cook it. If you put it outside, probably not, because there might be vermin out there and you don't really want to risk anything there. But cook squash, anything you use for decorative, think about cooking it. And they're quite easy to cook, and you can do them various different ways. So I like to cut them in half, take out the seeds, which is important. Then I might slice them, and with a pumpkin or butternut squash, I tend to slice them. I sprinkle on some seasoning, but something like smoked paprika, cumin, ground coriander, any sort of spice. A bit of ginger would be lovely and warm. And I roast them in the oven. And I might serve it as a side to another dish. But quite often I'll turn it into a soup. I sometimes add the cooked squash to a risotto with maybe a little bit of goat's cheese. Now that actually, squash themselves are very high in water content and low calorie. Now putting it in a risotto would be heightening that calorific value. Now I'm not bothered about calories. I tend not to count them. It's not, to me and to many people who nutritional therapists and practitioners in this sort of field, it's not really helpful when it comes to weight loss. It can be helpful in certain circumstances, but in general, I find people counting calories isn't really helpful at all, and it makes it very stressful. But for those who are interested, it is low in calories. It's between, I think summer squash are very high, 90-something% water, whereas winter squash are less, sort of, I think 80-something. I can't remember exactly, but they'll all vary a bit. So yes, talking about how I use them, I also will puree them, and I can use it for a mash with fish. It's rather nice, particularly when you make it a little slightly more oriental and add some tamari and ginger, garlic, and various flavours like that. It's really nice if you add those sort of flavours. But I also have used it in pumpkin pie, and I've used the Sarah Wilson recipe, and I can't remember the name of her book, but it's a book she's written to help people get off sugar, to really quit sugar. I think it's called I Quit Sugar, potentially. And the pumpkin pie recipe in there is rather good. So I've used that. I've also pureed pumpkin and put it in porridge in the winter. I have done a spiced pumpkin or butternut squash smoothie, which in the winter months, I have not had smoothies for ages. In the winter months, that's quite nice. I tend not to have smoothies in the winter anyway. And it can affect although the fiber's there, it can affect its use within our bodies when it's been really pulped up into mush, basically. But yeah, so I will mash, roast, steam, puree, stuff it as well. That's nice stuffed. I've stuffed it with a lentil dish and mushrooms, which is quite nice. It's also nice actually with wild rice and cranberries, so making something a little bit more vibrant. I've used butternut squash raw. I've grated it and put it in salads, and again it's quite nice making it into a sort of winter coleslaw. And you can go to town on what you put in there, like the spices and, tamari sauce or soy sauce, a bit of chili, and really add to it. So there's a lot you can do with it. Now the seeds, you could give them to the birds maybe. I tend to clean them off and lightly toast them, and I tend to put some spice on those as well. And interestingly, squash originate from Central America, and they were cultivated initially for the seeds because apparently they didn't have much flesh on them, and the flesh was quite bitter. And then as cultivation has continued, they've been made sweeter and there's more flesh. And it was Christopher Columbus who brought the squash over to Europe, and you find squash are grown all over the world actually now, and it's a popular vegetable. Now I find it takes up a lot of room in the garden, and I tend not to grow it. I do courgettes, but I saw a gentleman who's got an allotment, and he has bought a polytunnel frame and he's wound it up the allotment, so it's got a nice grass pathway, and he's growing squash up the framework along with other vegetables and flowers, and it looks absolutely stunning. And I thought that's fabulous because they are trailing, and you can train them. Obviously the massive pumpkins you wouldn't because it'd be too heavy, but some of the smaller ones, I thought that they've got the trumpet squash, that would be a good one to do. So I thought that was a lovely idea, so I might try that one maybe next year. So I'm a nutritional therapist. Some of you know that already. Some of you probably haven't seen me before. I'm a nutritional therapist. So the nutritional factors of squash are also important, and they are highly nutritious. And they contain beta carotene, potassium, there's some calcium, some magnesium, phosphorus. They're rich in fibre. What else is there? The beta carotene we can convert into vitamin A. There's some B1, there's some folate, some niacin. There's all sorts in there. They are really quite nutrient rich. And I did have a little look up to see what the latest says about the benefits of eating squash. And for people in mid-years, going into older age, which is obviously for those of you who've seen me before, you know this is what I'm really about. It's about helping women particularly get through this awkward period, this transition, and look forward to a healthy old age. What's interesting is squash can be really beneficial to support us in that period. And the fibre is great for our digestion, helps keep us moving, but also helps us manage our blood sugar. So it's been related to reducing the risk of type 2 diabetes, which is good. This often comes on in older age. And then it also, other claims are protective against colorectal cancer and other cancers, heart disease. It's got anti-inflammatory compounds in it, which is great for those of us who've got some joint issues. It's also, what else has it got? Yes, really rich in vitamin C and vitamin A, and it's very helpful for the immune system. So there's some relationship to reducing the risk of catching colds and flu, and maybe even overcoming if you do contract that. So a squash soup made perhaps with a nice chicken broth would be quite a nice thing to have if you have a cold. That would help you boost your nutrition and be easy on the stomach and help you recover, hopefully. What else was there? What other health issues? Oh, eye health. I forgot about eye health. Yeah, there's because of the beta carotene and the potential for vitamin A, bringing down the inflammation, etc. So there's a relationship to improved eye health as well. So there's quite a lot that it is potentially helpful for, and particularly for those of us heading into our older years, wanting to get some protection. So my message really, let's just turn the page. I wrote something else, I know I did. Oh yes, of course, important, bone health. I forgot the minerals, of course, I just mentioned. Calcium, magnesium, phosphorus are really helpful for bone health. So that is a subject I think I ought to speak about at some point, because it is prevalent. I've no idea what my bone density is. I ought to really find out, because I do have nutritional therapist friends who are some older, some younger, who have been diagnosed with osteopenia, which is the precursor to osteoporosis. And so even when you know what you're doing, I know I went to a presentation with Joe Pizzorno, who's a well-known doctor in the United States, and his wife, who's also, and they write books together, and he was closely related to Bill Clinton's White House staff, being a medical advisor, I understand. I might not have that quite right, but it was, you know, he's up there. And his wife, her family have a history of osteoporosis, and knowing what she knows, being in the field she's in, she anticipated that she wouldn't contract that. And when she went to an exhibition, I think she had a DEXA scan as just a matter of course it was there. Yes, of course I did. And she found out that she did have osteopenia, and because it's of high risk within her family, particularly the female line, and yeah, it was a bit of a shock. She has rectified that situation. She looked into it in great depth, and recommends various supplements, which I won't mention at this stage because it's so personal. But yeah, so it can happen to anybody, and I think that's something worth talking about at some point. But I just wanted to encourage everybody, yes, buy the squash, decorate with them. They are beautiful, and the winter squash lasts well. Once you've finished with the decoration, chop them up and cook them, and make them into stews, put them into risottos, put them into soups, make pumpkin pies, no sugar, pumpkin pies, add it into your porridge in the winter, mix it with pureed apple, you know, add it into some yogurt. There's a lot you can do with it, and I would encourage you to do that and get those health benefits that it can provide. So, as always, thank you very much for joining me. If you like this video, please like it and subscribe, only if you want to. I always say that. I don't want anybody to feel obliged. And please share it with anybody who may benefit, because I really do want to reach as many women as I can at this period in our lives, to help them just do little things to improve their future. And, you know, going through the menopause is a tough one for many people. And if I can help somebody get through it just a little bit easier, then that would be my pleasure, my absolute joy to do that. So thank you very much for joining me this week. I hope to see you again soon, and have a lovely rest of your week.